Welcome to Every Mom is an Athlete, the podcast where we believe motherhood is inherently athletic. From lifting car seats to chasing toddlers, your daily life is a workout. I'm Dr. Karlie, pregnancy and postpartum expert, sports chiropractor, strength coach, and mom of three. This is your space for strength, recovery, and real talk in pregnancy, postpartum, and motherhood. Welcome, Strong Moms. You're in the right place. Hello, Strong Moms, and welcome back. Today, we're talking about why I truly and wholeheartedly believe you should not be waiting 6 weeks after you have your baby to start exercise. Now, if that makes you a little uncomfortable, good, because most of what we've been told about postpartum recovery is either incomplete or it's just flat out wrong. So the 6-week mark, there's no actual research behind this number. Now, there's some tissue healing, right? There's some evidence, obviously, that bleeding stops by then, that the wound on the inside of your body from where the placenta detaches has begun to heal and is almost to that complete healing stage. Your uterus is starting to shrink back down. It's not all the way back to pre-pregnancy size, but it is getting closer. But basically, this number came around in the early 1900s, and it was just the timing of that next checkup. And so the idea of do nothing for 6 weeks, like, I don't know where that came from, but for me, it has never made much sense. And for a lot of the women that I work with in my office as a pregnancy and postpartum chiropractor, it doesn't make much sense either, whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically. We'll talk about all of those. But there's just so much you can do before 6 weeks. And I would argue if you want to get back to that high level of physical fitness and athleticism, then you should be doing it. And here's the thing, the 6-week appointment, in case you haven't had it yet, the 6-week appointment, many women have different experiences. So I worked mostly with midwives during my pregnancies, except for my second when my son was breech and I had a planned C-section. So I switched to the OBs. I actually still, my dear friend who's a midwife, she helped deliver my son via C-section. So that was pretty cool. But I just say that because everyone has a different experience with what their 6-week appointment looks like. But I will tell you that it's basic medical clearance, right? They're asking you, are you bleeding still? Are you having any pain? I had a friend recently who had pretty bad hemorrhoids, which is actually common, and they didn't address it, and she didn't want to bring it up. And so it's just like, there's just so much that doesn't get addressed at that appointment. Least of which is your core functioning? Is your pelvic floor coordinated with your diaphragm? What do your movement patterns look like? Are you compensating in certain areas? Like, this is just not the OB's job to evaluate all this stuff. So this is a job for someone like me, a pregnancy and postpartum chiropractor, a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I'm so sad that in this country, in the US, this isn't just a part of the postpartum rehab. It is in many other countries because, I mean, you wouldn't have a shoulder surgery, you wouldn't have a knee surgery without having a rehab plan. But apparently we just have surgery or have a vaginal birth, right? C-section or vaginal birth, we still need a rehab plan. It's still a traumatic experience to our body. Whether it's emotionally traumatic is a different story, but it is a trauma to our body. And so we need help recovering from that experience, especially because we just don't live our lives the way that we were originally designed to, right? We sit so much more. We're not out being nearly as active as we would have if we were like hunting and gathering and bending down to get berries and reaching up for things, right? We're just not as active. So we have to do a lot more to get back to that level that we want to. I'm like off on a soapbox now. Let's get back on track here, Karlie. So what's actually happening in the body? You've gone through this massive abdominal stretch. Have you been pregnant? Yes, you obviously know. Your pelvic floor has this insane load on it, right? Whether or not you have a vaginal birth, you're still that baby's weight and everything is bearing down on your pelvic floor for 9 months. Not those first couple months, but you get the idea. There could be trauma. There could be some tearing. You could have had a C-section. There's a lot of changes in breathing patterns during pregnancy. And this is one of the things I see most because if you think about how the body works, so this big old baby's in there taking up all this space. Your organs are shifted around. Your diaphragm, which is your main breathing muscle, it is crammed up under your ribs, right? There's no room for it. So once that baby comes out, the diaphragm is essentially the top of your core, okay? So you have your diaphragm at the top, pelvic floor is the bottom, and then you have all the muscles kind of wrapping around to make this barrel of your core, okay? So if the diaphragm is all crammed up and not working and you can't get that big breath in, we've got to work on that excursion because you're not going to be able to heal your pelvic floor if your diaphragm's not working because they work together in coordination. Also, of course, there's a lot of nervous system stress throughout pregnancy and into the postpartum phase. So if we do nothing, if we don't work on some of these breathing and bracing techniques and drills and like get back to a more normal way of functioning, our core is going to stay disconnected. We start to lock into some of these compensation patterns that women have developed through pregnancy. This is, for example, like where you see people with rib flare or women talking about, oh, my ribs are just so flared out now. They never went back after pregnancy. This is totally fixable, but you have to do the work around it because this is a compensation pattern. Obviously, especially in very small rib caged women, this has to change so that the baby can grow and the abdominal muscles are pulling and all that stuff. But it's very fixable once the baby comes out if you do the work around it. And by the way, it's never too late to fix that. I actually developed a rib flare plan a couple of years ago because I had posted something random on Instagram and I had literally almost 200 women message me and say like, I have rib flare. I didn't know this was a thing. So maybe I'll do another episode about that in the future. But if you're interested in that, I'll put the link for that below as well. And so what else happens if you do nothing? We can end up with weakness. We can end up with pain. Again, these are from compensation patterns that set in during pregnancy. And yes, I just want to be clear. The body does heal on its own, okay? The tissues are actually going to heal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is automatically going to function well without some help and some guidance. And again, especially if you want to get back to a high level of fitness. Okay, all this is good and great, Karlie, but what do we do? Let's talk about what we do instead. So I recommend starting literally the first week that you have your baby with some breathing drills. This is not a workout, okay? This is starting to connect your breathing and your pelvic floor together again. I started with all three of my babies, even with my C-section in the hospital, working on breathing drills. And so what this looks like is you're working on 360 breathing all the way around your abdomen. So you're not just trying to breathe out into the front, okay? It's not belly breathing. You're breathing all the way around. And then as you breathe out, I have women do sort of an aggressive, like, where you're almost like breathing through a straw. So your lips are kind of pursed. Breathe out. And then as you do that, try to pull the two hip bones together. Not as hard as you can. It's just very gentle. If you try to engage them like, as hard as you can, you actually end up engaging your rectus abdominis, that kind of like six-pack muscles. And we don't want to do that because those start to pull apart the separation. So what you want to do is just a very slight engagement of those two muscles together. Sometimes another cue I use is like if you were trying to like zip up tight jeans, that kind of like pull in you would do right between your hip bones. That's what you want to do as you breathe out. And so this is literally just breathing, and it's starting to engage your transverse abdominis, which is one of the main deep core muscles that we need to work on as we recover postpartum. Now, if you feel like you can't get, like you're like, Karlie, I cannot access that. I can't figure out what's going on between the two hip bones. What I have patients in my office do, and what actually in my postpartum plan, this is built into the first week, actually it's in the first 2 weeks, is just lay on your side. So lay on your side, knees bent, head relaxed. Put your hand so that it's kind of wrapping around the top hip bone, and then try to feel that muscle. I'm doing it right now. I wish you could see me. Try to feel what that muscle is doing as you do the same thing that I just described. So breath in, all the way around, 360 breath. Breath out through a straw. Try to pull those two hip bones together. And usually you can start to feel that muscle fire up right there. And so that's what you're looking for. And getting that connection, just that mind-body connection of the breathing, feeling the muscle, like that's a huge piece. And so even if you just started with that, I would be so much happier than if you did nothing. The next thing we do is focus on this connection before we start looking at intensity, right? So we're focusing on the core and the pelvic floor. I have people start with just the breathing, and then we add in the pelvic floor work later, because the way that your diaphragm, as I was describing before, your pelvic floor and your diaphragm, as you breathe in, it moves down. As you breathe out, it moves up. And so just by using these breathing techniques, you are doing some pelvic floor work, but it's automatic. And so you don't have to like be thinking about it at first. We add that in later as you do some like Kegels and holds and like, working on some power, working on some endurance, all that kind of stuff. But at first, you're just focusing on the breathing. Now, another thing that a lot of people want to know about is walking. So I will tell you that with my first baby, I could squat. I could do basically all of my postpartum rehab from the week 1 of the plan. I could do all of that before I could walk around the block because it just felt too heavy for me to be walking that far, especially holding my baby. Like that was a couple weeks out. Like if I could hold him in a carrier, it was just too much strain on my pelvic floor. But doing the exercises at home for those first couple weeks felt great. So everyone is different. A lot of moms just want to get out and walk. And I hear this in my practice all the time. I'm walking a couple miles. that's great. It's great, obviously, for mental clarity as well, to get out and get some sunlight and some fresh air. But if you had to choose, if I had to choose, I would choose that you did some gentle rehab, core, breathing, bracing, glute activation exercises. And then once things are feeling a little more stable, get into walking more. Remember, movement, if you do it correctly, it's going to help improve circulation, reduce pain, helps you recover faster, but you have to do it correctly, right? So we don't want to jump in and like be walking multiple miles before our pelvic floor and low back and pelvis and everything is not ready to stabilize us. Okay, so mistakes I see a lot of them, okay? I see a lot. The biggest one is waiting 6 weeks and then just like jumping right back in, especially to something like a HIIT class or CrossFit without doing any of the pre-work. That is when I'd have to go back and look, but I can say pretty certainly that most of the injuries that I've seen in early postpartum, and not even early, maybe let's say in that first year, would be because someone didn't do much rehab and then, they were naturally athletic, they'd been active their whole pregnancy, and then they jumped right back into stuff at 6 weeks. And yes, they were modifying stuff, but it was still just too much because they hadn't done any pre-work. They hadn't done any of this breathing and bracing and muscle engagement and that sort of thing. Other mistakes I see is just doing Kegels. Okay, Kegels are great. Arguably, most women newly postpartum should be doing some kind of pelvic floor work. But we don't always know. We don't always know if the pelvic floor is too tight, if you need endurance, if you need strength and power. And so blanket just doing Kegels, fine, maybe, but it's not the end all be all. And there should be like a whole plan around it, not just Kegels. The other thing I see that really, really irks me and it makes me sad actually is that women ignore symptoms that are telling them that their body's not ready. So leaking, pain, heaviness, pressure in the pelvic floor and the vagina. These are not normal things. And I think we get told that it's normal. Oh, you had a baby. Of course you're going to leak when you sneeze or you laugh like that. No, that means you have pelvic floor dysfunction. I mean, even if you haven't had a baby, that means you have pelvic floor dysfunction. And there's so much you can do about it. And so just accepting that, for me, it makes me so sad because there is a way better way to deal with that and to live than just accepting that as the end all be all. The other thing I see women do in my office, I guess, is just pick like random stuff online to do. And it's fine, right? Like if you find someone who is legit, like a pelvic floor PT that you really like and follow. But I see people following random like influencer exercise like routines that don't involve any pelvic floor, deep core, breathing advice. And so that would be my one thing that I'd say about that is if you are following someone online, make sure that it has those components, some kind of breathing, some kind of bracing, some kind of talk about pelvic floor, and then glute engagement too, because the glutes are directly connected into the pelvic floor. So if you really want to heal your pelvic floor, you have to focus on your glutes. Okay, so let's bring this all back around. I'm not saying to rush your recovery, okay? You don't need to rush anything, but if you are feeling like you want to get moving and you want to have some control over your postpartum experience, especially if you're like me and you just really thrive on exercise and having that routine and it's like your time, then I would recommend more than anything starting off postpartum recovery sooner rather than later. We can take ownership of our recovery early. We can build this foundation so we can actually get back to these workouts we love without pain, without leaking, without injuries and setbacks and all that sort of thing. If you're postpartum right now and you're like, okay, great, but what do I actually do? That's exactly why I created my postpartum plan. It walks you through what to do starting as early, literally, as day 1 if you want, if you had a fairly uncomplicated vaginal birth. If you had a C-section, I usually recommend waiting until about week 2 to start. But again, it's so gentle. It starts off so gentle that you can start early and then it progresses you over 8 weeks into actually getting back to using some weights, using some bands, all that kind of stuff. It's designed to be done in just like 20 minutes a day, okay? And it's a very minimal equipment. 4 items, they're listed in there for you. There's also some great nutritional advice that a dietitian friend of mine added for me last year that I just really love. So I'll link that in the show notes as well. And I would just so appreciate it if you would share this episode with a new mom or someone you know who loves exercise and is having their baby soon. They need to hear all of this. So please share with those strong moms out there. Next episode in this series of Why Strong Moms Don't Do Blank, we're talking about why strong moms don't just do Kegels and what works instead. See you next week. Thanks for listening. Every Mom is an Athlete isn't just a podcast. It's a reminder that you're still the athlete you've always been. this episode resonated with you, I'd so appreciate it if you'd share with a friend or leave a quick review. It helps more moms find the support and information they need. See you next time.